Brigadier Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff, the Barbados Defense Force. Captain Naval Mark Peterson, Deputy Chief of Staff. Commander Wilbert Kirton, former Deputy Chief of Staff and today's guest lecturer. Commander David Dorridge, Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Lieutenant Colonel Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer, Barbados Regiment. Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, Commanding Officer, Acting, Barbados Coast Guard. The Reverend Dr. Joel Cumberbatch, Chaplain of the Barbados Coast Guard. Master Chief Petty Officer Class 1 Austin Howell, Force Sergeant Major, Barbados Defense Force. Officers, both serving and retired. Warrant officers, enlisted ranks, both serving and retired. Other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Lieutenant Coast Guard Crispin Hackett, your Master of Ceremonies for this evening's proceedings. And it is indeed a pleasure to be here in commemoration of the 45th anniversary of existence of the Barbados Defense Force. We are currently underway, and before we slip, it is important to give thanks. And so at this time, we invite our chaplain to move the invocation, Reverend Dr. Cumberbatch.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to invite you to stand, if you don't mind, as we pray. Shall we repeat the Lord's Prayer together? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Our Father, we continue to celebrate your goodness to us as a force, even as we celebrate 45 years. As we look back, no doubt there have been challenges, but indeed there have been many, many victories and successes. And for this, we give you thanks. We pray as we take this historical journey tonight, as we focus on the Coast Guard, that we will remember those visionaries, those foundation builders, indeed that cloud of witnesses who indeed made a sterling contribution to the development of the force. We pray especially for the presenter, grant wisdom, grant clarity of thought, grant that the presentation will be engaging and stimulating. And at the end of it, may we have even a more profound appreciation, not only of the work of the Barbados Defense Force, but the work of the Barbados Coast Guard. Continue to bless our Chief of Staff, bless our commanding officer of the Coast Guard and all the men and women who work tirelessly and who have done that over the years to make our organization what it has been. So again, we give you thanks, and may your divine grace and enablement be with us all, both now and always. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Please be seated. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Cumberbatch. Ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize, let me say that on the onset, because I saw some confusion earlier on many faces due to my use of language. However, this evening has a focus on the maritime aspect, and from time to time, the jargon will come up. Nevertheless, we are now making way, and I so now invite Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, Commanding Officer Acting of the Barbados Coast Guard, to con this vessel with a few remarks.
Forgive me, my age is telling. Brigadier Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff for Barbados Defense Force. Captain Naval Mark Peterson, Deputy Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force. Commander Wilbert Kirton, former Deputy Chief of Staff and today's guest lecturer. Commander Dave Dowridge, Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Lieutenant Colonel Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer, Barbados Regiment. No, I'm not going to call myself. The Reverend Dr. Joel Combach, Chaplain of the Barbados Coast Guard. Master Chief Petty Officer Class 1, Austin Howell. 4 Sergeant Major, Barbados Defense Force officers, both serving and retired. 1 officers, enlisted ranks, both serving and retired. Other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This evening, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming all of you to the 3rd in the lecture series of the Barbados Defense Force 45th anniversary. So a little introduction into the Barbados Coast Guard. The mission of the Coast Guard is to safeguard the national interests of Barbados and protect its waters against all threats through professionalism, constant vigilance, interagency cooperation, and the enforcement of maritime law. So, pre-1979, the Barbados Coast Guard was established in August 1974, and it was called the Barbados Coast Guard Service at that point in time at Enterprise in Christchurch, where the main roles were search and rescue, investigating illegal entry of persons and goods, and enforcing the law against dynamite fishing around the coastal waters. This service was dissolved on the 30th of September 1978. Post-1979, we had the Defense Act, which made provision for the creation of the Coast Guard as a maritime wing of the Barbados Defense Force. In 2007, we had the current relocation of the Barbados Coast Guard, the mighty Grenada Highway, where it's currently located. The Barbados Coast Guard is a maritime arm of the Barbados Defense Force and is tasked with enforcement of the maritime laws and regulation. It works in concert with various law enforcement agencies in order to secure Barbados' maritime border and its sovereignty. Such agencies as the ICSS, the Regional Security Service Air Wing, the Barbados Police Service Maritime Unit, Customs and Excise, Immigration, Fisheries. It also provides military assistance to the civil ministries in the form of assistance to the Barbados Poor Inc., the Multiple Sclerosis Society, Barbados, formerly the Barbados Youth Service, SJPIT, and the Coastal Zone Management Unit. I don't want to steal too much of the Commander's thunder, as he will expand on the development and contribution of the Barbados Coast Guard to maritime security, but that was just a brief introduction into the Barbados Coast Guard. And I welcome all of you to what will be, I will say, one of the most exciting lectures of the lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Commander Rochford. As we continue to sail full steam ahead on our track line, I would like to now tell you a bit about our guest speaker. Commander Wilbert Kirton and his career in the Barbados Defense Force on the 10th of November 1979. He entered Britannia Royal Naval College on the 5th of January 1980, receiving his commission as acting sub-lieutenant in February of 1981. Commander Kirton served on all of the Barbados Coast Guard vessels and his sea assignments, including commanding officer of the flagship HMBS Trident. On completion of his command at sea, he was appointed Executive Officer of the Coast Guard in November 1984, an officer commanding in the rank of Lieutenant Commander on the 14th of February 1986. He completed a 2-year diploma course in management studies prior to a Master of Science in Ports and Shipping Administration in 1989 at the World Maritime University in Sweden. He subsequently served as staff officer for Coast Guard operations at the Regional Security System headquarters. His next appointment was officer commanding the Administrative Support Unit at the Defense Force Headquarters prior to attending Royal Naval Staff College at the Royal Naval College, Greenwich, in 1994. While attending Royal Navy Staff course, he completed a Master of Arts degree in Defense Studies with King College, University of London. Subsequently, in January 1995, he was appointed officer commanded the Coast Guard for his second term. In January 1998, he was promoted to the rank of commander and seconded to set up the Project Management Office for Regional Maritime Cooperation and Law Enforcement Training, where he served as director with responsibility for the implementation of a 4-year project funded by France, Netherlands, Spain, UK, US, and European Commission. Commander Kirton was appointed Deputy Chief of Staff in September 2003. He retired from the Barbados Defense Force in July 2006 after 27 years of military service and worked as a national security consultant and visiting adjutant professor at the William J. Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies at the National Defense University in Washington from 2007 until 2017. He is married to Gloria, and they have 2 young adults, Joy and Jonathan. His interests include naval history, international relations, community service, interacting with different cultures, and, of course, keeping fit. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting on the topic From Enterprise to Pelican, the development and contributions of the Barbados Coast Guard to the maritime security of Barbados. Please join me in welcoming Commander Wilbert Kirton.
The Master of Ceremonies, Brigadier Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force, Captain Naval Mark Peterson, Deputy Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force, Commander of the Barbados Corps, Colonel Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer of the Barbados Regiment, Lieutenant Commander Graham Rushford, Commanding Officer, Acting, Barbados Coast Guard, Reverend Dr. Joel Cumberbatch, Chaplain of the Barbados Coast Guard, Master Chief Petty Officer, Class 1, Austin Howell, 4th Sergeant Major. Officers serving and retired, 1 officers, enlisted ranks, both serving and retired, other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I said good evening. Oh, that's better. I wish to thank the Barbados Defense Force on entrusting me of presenting this lecture, 5th anniversary lecture series. I've been asked to speak this evening on the topic From Enterprise to Pelican, Development and Contributions of the Barbados Coast Guard to Maritime Security of Barbados. I added in italics, and I was convinced that the Barbados Coast Guard Service done yeoman work across this region. From a navigator's perspective, the distance from Enterprise to Pelican by sea is approximately 8.5 nautical miles. Traveling at 20 knots, that's roughly 25 minutes, 30 seconds. However, the time taken by the Barbados Coast Guard to travel that distance was 32 years, from the 1st of June, 1974, and not August, 14th of September, That journey was a significant part of my life, and I wish to say it here at the outset. It was not all smooth sailing, but I had a very positive impact on my life. The constraints Thanks very much. Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2, testing. Consider the constraints of time this evening. I wish to commence by stating that the establishment and development of the Coast Guard did not occur in isolation. In this regard, it's necessary to bring some context to the period, the early 1970s to the late 1990s, before highlighting some extracts from the ship's log, which includes some broad overview of the voyage. At the outset, I wish to state that throughout the period of the early 70s and the late 90s, this is a period when Barbados had just had its independence, 1966, 4 years after independence. The world was somewhat different from the world we have now today. We were living then in a bipolar world, in the midst of a Cold War, the socialists versus the capitalists trying to dominate the world. Terrorists and mercenaries were very active across the world, and bombings and hijackings were common methods of negotiation and political recognition. The impact of this bipolar reality was very evident in this hemisphere, and the influence, to some extent, had an impact on the development of the Barbados Coast Guard. Most notable was the active geopolitical wave in South America, which turned towards a left-wing government throughout that period, as shown in this slide. You can see from the slide that majority of the countries in South America, excepting Colombia and Chile, and even Chile at that time was led by Pinochet, who was sort of on the other side of the fascist government. And this is where this is the sort of environment that the Barbados Coast Guard developed. It was this geopolitical environment that the Barbados Coast Guard, at the time, it was called the Barbados Coast Guard Service, was established on the 1st of June 1974. Former Assistant Commissioner of Police, who was retired at the time, he was appointed commander, and he had 16 what he calls specially men selected with careful scrutiny, and they were temporarily appointed under his command. The duty at this time, which you heard mentioned earlier, but also was to man the new constructed Coast Guard base, and which is now currently the Oistins Police Station, and also 2 vessels, 2 40-foot vessels, namely 2 40-foot Coast Guard vessels, namely Commander Marshall, which was named after a former landship commander, and T.T. Lewis, named after a former member of Parliament. These vessels were built in the United Kingdom. I want to say that establishing Coast Guard service goes back to way back to 23rd of May 1972. Lots of discussions were held between the government ministries and on the feasibility of setting up a Coast Guard at that time. Several recommendations were made. Senior naval officers were involved, marine consultants, and this led to the setup of the service. Major Sam Headley, who was very much involved in almost every aspect of development in Barbados, he was given the responsibility, which was a very difficult task, I must say, to oversee the establishment of the force. The roles of the Coast Guard at that time, you heard them mentioned, so I will not go over them again. But it's interesting to note that they were all done without any, there was a civilian organization and had no law enforcement status. So when you talk about arresting person with dynamite fishing, this sort of thing, and illegal entry, etc., there was no legal status. But that was the Barbados who lived at the time. Once you had on a uniform, people respected you. So this is one of the reasons they were able to do what they were required to do. I want to say that the infant service experienced heavy criticisms from all levels of the Barbadian community. This is a country, people have never seen a Coast Guard before, just out of independence. The government spending money on a Coast Guard. Why do we need a Coast Guard? These are the questions that were being asked by the community. And there were lots of challenges being at that time, particularly from the local community. However, in November 1974, the George Ferguson joined the flotilla, and this vessel was named after, 65-foot vessel. It was named after a highly respected Barbadian member of parliament, who was also very interested in helping the development of the Coast Guard against all the odds. The other vessel was JTC Ramsey, another 40-footer, as you saw earlier, and this was named after a prominent Barbados businessman. By the end of the 1974, the service had increased to 36 men. By the second year of operations, Major McConney, Courtney McConney, who was a reserve officer of the Barbados Regiment, at that time the regiment was not the regiment, no, it was a reserve element. He took command in 1976. He increased the manpower of the service, and I was among that group who joined at that time. The first major operation challenge we had at that time, this is a very small unit, men not trained properly, just going out to sea doing the duties. And the first challenge that we had was the 6th of October 1976, when the Cubana aircraft DC-8, Flight 455, crashed off the west coast of Barbados. This disaster was the first of its kind in the Caribbean, and it sent a really signal to the public who was criticizing the Coast Guard continuously. Why do we need a Coast Guard? It left a lot of questions being asked, well, what do we do now? In addition, the disaster also, let's step back a bit. The Tom Adams administration was elected to office in a general election on the 2nd of September 1976. This was just 4 weeks before the crash. And this disaster caused the administration to move more proactively towards the development and expansion of the service, unlike the approach that was taken when they were in opposition. The reports from that crash report that 73 persons died in the twin bombing. The aircraft had departed Guyana, stopped in Barbados, and was en route to Cuba. The captain of the aircraft, I think the first explosion went off as he just cleared the west coast, and he was trying to return to see if he could get back into Barbados, and the second bomb went off. And while it happened on the west coast, we were very thankful, because if that aircraft had come into somewhere like somewhere in the Cave Hill area, in this area, a lot of people would have died. That incident stretched the service and resources to its limit. All hands were on deck for approximately 4 weeks, helping with the investigation and recovery team. The aircraft position at this time is about 4.8 miles off the west coast. Now, I need to mention to you that this incident presented legal challenges for the government of Barbados under international law. The Law Sea Convention, UNCLOS 1, United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, UNCLOS 1, that convened in Geneva, Switzerland in 1958. The Convention of the Territorial Seas and Contiguous Zones, arising out of that conference, entered into force on the 10th of September 1964. And the convention at that time made provision for a territorial sea of only 3 miles. Considering that the Cubana aircraft had crashed approximately 4.8 miles off the coast, the government of Barbados had very limited jurisdiction over the crash. The government therefore was unable to arrest and extradite the 2 suspects who were responsible for the bombing and who they fled the island the same evening. Now, I just want to say to you, I know some of you are not maritime, and while Ms. Master Ceremonies made some points, I just want to show you this slide because for just general information, so that you can understand, and because some of it will come up again in the presentation. The Lloyd Sea Convention, which was held in 1982, on Clause 3, made provision for territorial seas of 12 miles. The territorial seas are very important. As you can see, the first line, you have to see the back of the first line going up there is the territorial seas, and that area is actually considered land. It's the territory of the country. Then the next 12 miles, out to 24 miles, that is the contiguous zone, and there you have immigration, customs, port, health, etc. can exercise the law in those areas. Beyond that, we go to the 200-mile limit, which is easy fishing, oil, like on those places like Guyana, 200 miles there on the continental shelf, and 200 miles you're still in shallow water, so oil, extracting oil, gas, etc. And then you have active seas. The first perceived threat to the island maritime security, this occurred on the 22nd of July, 1977. When 4 vessels from the Soviet Navy were sighted by a light aircraft about 15 miles south of the airport. They were heading due east. One of the vessels in the convoy at that time was a Kiev, which was the flagship of the USSR Navy. The aircraft carrier had just visited Cuba. At the time, you know, I said bipolar world, Cuba very much, as you know, a socialist country. And they had visited Cuba. And the aircraft, and incidentally, that convoy was being monitored by a U.S. Navy surveillance aircraft who were on radio silence and refused to identify themselves to the Granny Adams International Airport Control Tower. Now, this caused a lot of uncertainty in the country. And as I said, we were living in the threat of a bipolar world, middle of the Cold War, and all sorts of things happening around us. And that was considered a serious threat to national security. And this incident sent off alarms in the highest levels of government. And the Coast Guard was directed to investigate. The George First and T.T. Lewis departed to challenge these 4 vessels. Well, that we were supposed to do. You want to know what they're doing in our waters. Although at the time, 15 miles off Barbados, as you look at the chart, they would be in international waters at that time. But when the vessels got there, they had arrived in the area. Otherwise, there would be action. They had departed the island, and that was okay. There were a lot of problems experienced at the Coast Guard, not only challenge of training and development and resources, but the berthing area at the anchorage there worsened in 1977. This is just an idea of how crowded vessels were there. And a decision was taken to move the vessels from there because the area from the very beginning was not well sorted, in my opinion. Looking back now, at that time I didn't recognize that. It was a young seaman, I would say. But there are a lot of strong currents. Anybody know Enterprise? Strong currents, prevailing sea swells, and the security was very inadequate. The breakwater was created to provide safe berthing for the area vessels, eventually resulted in the famous Miami Beach. Those who go to Miami Beach would thank the Coast Guard for actually providing that. Those younger generation, older generation will tell you that as you come down the coast road to come into the Miami beach, all along there, people used to go and throw the line and catch fish. All that is beach now. However, the decision was taken to move the flotilla from there down to the southwestern end of the Greenwich, which berthed at the time the Port Authority buildings, the tugs and the pilot vessels, etc. And there was also, during that time, as discussions continue, what do we do with the Coast Guard? How can we develop the Coast Guard further? There were some discussions of merging the Coast Guard with the Harbor Police. If that happened, Lieutenant Commander Rushford, your uniform a different color today. Anyhow, thankfully, the plans to establish the Barbados Defense Force were set in motion in mid-1977, and by June 1978, a decision was made to resolve the Coast Guard service as a step towards the establishment of the Defense Force. On September 1978, the Coast Guard service had a complement of about 42 persons, and this was resolved, and members were given the opportunity to enlist in the Barbados Regiment. October that same year, those persons coming into the Coast Guard, into the regiment, had then to continue the service. It wasn't called Barbados Coast Guard service anymore. It was in the regiment. The Defense Force had not started yet. This 1978, and they're referred to us as the Regiment Marine Wing, and which had a company of 16 seamen. Now, this was very, very difficult, because you had 42 men before, and now you moved to 16 men to manage the vessels and do all the work that was done previously. And this had a really significant impact on the men at that time. The first real threat to the country, however, occurred in November 1978, and some of you may have heard about it. When Sidney Burney Allen, a former Barbadian merchant banker, and Patrick John, the then Prime Minister of Dominica, they concocted this great idea to create the Commonwealth of Dominica and Barbados. The scheme was to merge the two islands in a unitary state. I don't know how we're going to do that. The plot was exposed by the Barbadian nation, by the Nation News, and I believe they got information from the foreign intelligence sources. The alleged plot was to overthrow Prime Minister Tom Adams' administration. Since Allen was of the view, just showed the thinking at that time, that the Adams administration would turn Barbados over to the Cubans, who were aligned with the Soviet Union. Now, these 16 men we had, in preparation for the invasion, the Marine Wing rigged the George Ferguson. I don't know if you still have the GPMGs around. And like machine guns went on the 40-footer. And we were patrolling the west coast of the island, night and day, not knowing what was going to happen. But everybody was somewhat concerned. However, the French government in Martinique sent a patrol vessel to assist with the patrols at night. Fortunately, Sidney Burney Allen was arrested in Martinique waters, a yacht full of weapons and ammunition, and he said he was en route to Barbados. He was convicted, sentenced to imprisonment in jail in Martinique, along with a Canadian yachtsman for illegally importing weapons into Martinique. I was not quite sure how he was going to bring weapons, he and another person, a yacht, into Barbados and overtake a country who had, at the time, at least a strong Barbados regiment and a fledgling Coast Guard. Prime Minister Tom Adams was very adamant at the time, and he requested the Martinique government to have Burnett extradited to Barbados immediately on his release to be tried for treason. However, Burnett never returned to the island. He died in London. It's also worth noting that, mentioning that Prime Minister Patrick John was forced to resign from office 3 years later after national protests by the people of Dominica. And that is another story which I will not have time to go into. The year 1979, it seemed as though the year 1970 didn't want to end, and 1979 was a very, very challenging year for the Caribbean, for the Eastern Caribbean in particular. The geopolitical plans that I mentioned earlier for the region was well documented. There were meetings held across the region in terms of developing what is called a domino theory. Domino theory and geopolitical is that you make one island fall or country fall, and then the others will start to fall like the dominoes. And this took great strength because at that time, as I mentioned earlier, South America was sort of leaning left, most of the countries there. Central America had some countries as well which were leaning left. And we know of Cuba, which was riding the political wave at that time, left-wing political wave. And there was also plans at the time to create a similar wave in the Caribbean. This reality became evident at midnight on the 13th of March. Well, it became evident on March 13th, 1979, when we had to leave Barbados to transport journalists who were stranded in Grenada as a result of a coup which took place that day, causing the airport to be closed. The bloodless coup, as it was, ousted Sir Eric Gairy, who was the first Prime Minister of Grenada, as he was overseas at that time. My most vivid memory of the voyage, after we got there and we had the persons that we were picking up on board. Morris Bishop, that's not a very good picture, it's from The Nation. He boarded the vessel, and he said to us, he shook hands with everybody on board, and he said to us, he planned to hold general elections as soon as possible. The reason for the coup, in his own words, was, Gairy was there for a long time, he's unmovable, mongoose gang in place, and you could never do anything to win elections. And his approach was to, with some others, to have this coup, get rid of the Prime Minister, and then hopefully, his opinion, hopefully then go to the people who was tired too with the Prime Minister there, I think 4 or 5 terms in office, and have elections. Regrettably, his political party, the New Deal movement, they had different ideas, and this led to his untimely death approximately 4 years later. On the 13th of April that same year, a month later, the Soufriere volcano in St. Vincent erupted, and volcanic ash reached Barbados. Although there were no casualties, thousands were evacuated from the volcano danger zone, and flagship George Ferguson made several trips to the island with relief supplies, and the crew got involved in distribution. As we move forward into the ship's log, the Defense Force Act was mentioned earlier, was passed, but it did not pass lightly. There was a lot of political debate. It's interesting that one government in power started the Coast Guard, pushing towards developing the Coast Guard, the need for Coast Guard. And then the other government started the Defense Force, and then there was a lot of political debate over, again, and I guess it's still continuing, why do we need a Defense Force? The regiment can do all the work need to be done. But this is why I tell you have to look at the context, because the world we were living at the time was a very, very, it was bipolar, it was a military Cold War, but at the same very time, it was anything can happen at a given time. And at that time, as I said earlier, the communists and socialist governments were trying their best to get into this region. As you say in political bipolar world, the Caribbean is on the belly of the United States, because having all Latin America and South America, and then some of Latin America, then they get the Caribbean. So the idea was that one country would fall and start in Grenada, and then the others would follow. And there's some very interesting reading that on this matter, which I would encourage you to have a look at. This political instability continued in December 1979, and there was a brief rebellion at the Union Island by one person named Lennox Bumba Charles. He was very much impressed and heartened by the recent revolution in Grenada, And he started to allege that the central government in St. Vincent were not looking after the island, and he wanted to sort of create a coup there. And this was very difficult because the military administration had just become an independent nation 27th of October that same year, and now they were faced with another major problem. Anyhow, the revolt was quickly put down, and Charles was arrested, but the flagship George Ferguson was on standby to transport Barbados Defence Force personnel into Union Island. The Coast Guard continued to develop over this period, and the expansion and development NATO squadron strength in the Defence Force. By the end of 1979, the government had started to look for a new site for the Coast Guard base, and consideration given to several locations around the island. But having made an error in the past with the oil since, anywhere on the island you have to actually design an actual port, etc. So consideration was given to Fort Willoughby. At the time, that was the correct name. And this is what it would look like, but I just put this up so that you can actually, those who are not familiar will know exactly where it's located. And this was identified as a suitable base for the Coast Guard. Construction work started there, and the flotilla had to move to the shallow water draft at the Bridgetown port to facilitate the work. In 1980 also, the Barbados Defence Force recognized, at that time you only had the George Ferguson and the 40-footers, and they recognized the need for offshore capability and to be able to stay at sea for a much longer period of time. And they made the decision to purchase HMBS Trident and the two former trimp trawlers, which were converted as long-range vessels. In those days, they didn't look for much speed because the traffickers were using trawlers as well and fishing boats, etc. So you could catch them very easily, or at least keep up with them. Trident arrived in Barbados on the 25th of November 1981, and it took its position as the Barbados Coast Guard flagship. It was deployed immediately, continued to work in the region. I'm not getting into all the details, but a lot of support and hurricanes supply and relief missions, etc. And the smaller vessels, the other vessels, they provided support in long-range patrols, etc. These vessels and the Coast Guard base was commissioned on the 27th of February 1982. But foreign political influence continued to be a concern in the region. And the Barbados Coast Guard first major operation was deployment again to Grenada to participate in urgent fury. And this is regionally known as Grenada Rescue Mission. The political party, New Jewel Movement, which I mentioned earlier, they had established the People's Revolutionary Government, headed by the same Prime Minister Morris Bishop. Now, during this period between 1979 and 1983, Bishop attended several meetings within the CARICOM. And one thing he faced when he met with the other ministers, people were saying to him, "We are elected by the people. Why don't you call elections as you promised and to be elected by the people? So you can be sitting at the table as a prime minister." And in October that same year, a power struggle between the governments resulted. And this caused the arrest and subsequent murder of the Prime Minister Morris Bishop and several members of his cabinet. This hideous act alarmed the members of the OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and they appealed to the United States, Barbados, and Jamaica to intervene. Barbados and Jamaica and the Eastern Caribbean States intervened, and they responded. Interestingly, Trinidad and Guyana refused to get involved in the crisis. On around October 25th, 1983, 6 days after the Prime Minister Morris Bishop was executed, United States Armed Forces landed troops on the beaches of Grenada, approximately 7,000 U.S. soldiers, and they were supplemented about 300 military and police personnel from the Eastern Caribbean. And they responded because it was against the will of the people of the Eastern Caribbean to have a government of socialist government established in Grenada, because as I said earlier, this will be the stepping stone for other things to happen. The Grenadian troops at that time was about 1,200, and they included Cubans and advisors from Soviet Union, North Korea, East Germany, Bulgaria, and Libya. The operation was deemed a very quick success, with minimum casualties, and it wrapped up in mid-December 1983. HMBS Excellent, the vessel you saw earlier, that sailed to Grenada during the operation and was stationed there for approximately 4 weeks, with crew rotation every 6 weeks. Trident, on the other hand, I was in command at the time. Our task was to get into Grenada and patrol the coastal waters and to ensure that Bernard Cord, who at that time then, after the invasion, tried to escape with his comrades to make sure that they didn't leave the island. Cord and his comrades were captured within a few days, and Trident then returned to Barbados. Immediately after this event in Grenada, Barbados took the lead in establishing a regional security system. And again, HMBS Trident was delegated the lead role in the RSS coordinated patrols, which involved transiting the RSS Maritime area of interest from St. Kitts and Nevis in the north to Grenada in the south. I want to say at this time that the patrols were not only law enforcement patrols, but they included maritime training. A lot of the young Coast Guardmen at the time did their training on Trident. Navigation, seamanship, all was done on the Trident, between passages between the countries. It also included move of personnel. Sometimes you had situations where you had to move personnel from one country to the next country. Law enforcement personnel. This was done. And storage and disasters, relief supplies as well. I'm not going to talk about the other hurricane relief, etc., which did a lot of that as well. I want to say at this time that although the Coast Guard roles expanded significantly or rapidly through the 1980s and 90s, the personnel and maritime assets did not keep pace. So Trident became very much a workhorse, and the other vessels the trawlers were vessels which were used for many years in fishing, and they had sort of had their life extended somewhat by the refit. And therefore, you had to find a way to boost the manpower of the Coast Guard to get people to get some time off on weekends, and because of this, we started the Coast Guard Reserves, established Coast Guard Reserves. We also I'm very interested to hear that partnerships continue. We form partnerships with the law enforcement entities such as police, customs, immigration, and the general maritime community. There were sometimes we had difficulty with search and rescue, and persons who had yachts and, not yachts so much, but the power boats will come out and give assistance. And in fact, we had a very good community working with those individuals. We had some main operation challenges, and I wish to mention some of them at this time, and which happened during the 80s and 90s. In the 80s, we witnessed the emergence of new motorized watercraft, including more speedboats and jet skis and other power sailing, etc. And these activities were sort of concentrated in the nearshore waters of the West Coast and South Coast. These areas were already under pressure from fishing and other maritime activities, and the demand was very great. And this development presented the Coast Guard Command with challenges. We had to try to enforce the laws which were enacted for safety and life at sea, while facilitating at the same time these water sports activities which were popular demand by the visitors. Another operation challenge we had, and which was worth mentioning, is the rapid expansion of the local fishing industry. Between 1980 and 1990, almost 100 fishing vessels were fishing then at great length. They were designed as ice boats and fish at great length in the area. And and there also was great distances from shore, that is, and for a long extended period. At that time, navigation and other skills that were required, they had the big boats, but then they had the training, and a lot of the vessels from time to time would go adrift, run out of fuel, and all sorts of issues, and the Coast Guard was busy with rescue missions, using mainly the Trident, which was not designed to tow, and even sometimes we had medical evacuations, which were executed sometimes hundreds of miles from the island. But the most threatening development to impact the maritime security during that period was the escalation of illicit drug trafficking at sea. This is well documented, and no need to mention a lot about this, but drug trafficking still poses the most destabilizing threat, security threat, which respects no borders. Traffickers don't respect borders, as you well know. These operation requirements were very challenging back then, and as traffickers shift their method of operation constantly to evade the integrated operation of law enforcement agencies. I would like to make mention quickly of one unexpected and interesting political and economic dispute, which arose between Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados in the mid-2000s. This was a result of the failed bilateral negotiations for the access by Barbadian fishermen to flying fish in the waters of Tobago. The government of Trinidad and Tobago had established the exclusive economic zone, as you see under the Sea Convention 3 in 1986. And this placed the traditional fishing site, which Barbadians use, off the coast of Tobago under the sole control of Trinidad and Tobago. During the period between July 2000 and November 2003, Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago engaged in several rounds of bilateral negotiations, including maritime boundaries and fisheries negotiations. The Permanent Court of Arbitration, which served as a registry for the proceedings and arbitration, took place in The Hague. While arbitration was underway, Barbados continued to exercise its right by sending HMBS Trident to conduct weekly patrols in the disputed area between Barbados and Trinidad. This operation policy decision was unsustainable from the outset, and therefore was short-lived. Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago were told eventually by the arbitration court that they have to work out an agreement to and govern the access of Barbadian fishermen to Trinidad waters. Unfortunately, no formal agreement has been reached, to my knowledge, since the ruling on the boundary issue was handed down 11th of April 2006. By 2003, Barbados Coast Guard had outgrown Wilbert Fort and was once again looking for a new home. This slide shows how congested the Wilbert Fort was at that time, and there were a lot of factors affecting the base at that time. Inadequate facilities, the Coast Guard numbers had increased, the ability to conduct covert operations, the coinage was silting up, sometimes made it difficult for the vessels to move in and out. And there are other operation requirements that necessitated the need for a new home. By this time, I was in the force headquarters as Deputy Chief of Staff and overseeing the Barbados Coast Guard Strategic Review. Having experienced 3 moves previously and living sometimes in less than adequate facilities, I was determined that the Barbados Coast Guard base should be designed and built fit for purpose. It was not an easy task, but after much negotiation and presentations, it was finally agreed later in the latter part of 2003 that I should lead a team to visit U.S. Coast Guard bases in Florida. And while the HMBS Pelican was not built to the exact standards of U.S. Coast Guard bases, and this was due to budget constraints and other policy decisions which were beyond our control. The new facility at that time, in my opinion, provided most of the required amenities required for our modern Coast Guard base during that period. I will close at this point. There's a lot more can be said, but I think I've shared enough this evening, which you can ponder on and even ask questions. In closing, I wish to congratulate the Barbados Coast Guard for having reached such a significant milestone in the celebration of 45 years of service to this nation. As the dawn of the 50th anniversary emerges on the horizon, I wish to encourage you to look to the future with confidence, despite the challenges which are inevitable. You'll agree with me that today we live in a world that is volatile, uncertain, and very complex. It therefore be remiss of me to predict how the roles of the Barbados Coast Guard will evolve over the next 5 years. I wish, however, to encourage you to be resolved, to remain steadfast to the honorable service as guardians of our shores. Thank you very much, and God bless. I will now take any questions. Well, hope it's not going to be a very different one, sir.
Commander, I basically wanted to stand and say a heartfelt thank you to you, sir, for a splendid, I would say a fantastic and very engaging presentation. I'm fairly sure that there are young, bright sparks in this room, officers, sailors, etc., from the Coast Guard who would have gained a wealth of knowledge on the history of the Coast Guard, and even before the Barbados Coast Guard, the Coast Guard service, which they would not have been exposed to before. So I wanted to say a heartfelt thank you for imparting that knowledge on them, because, you know, we're roughly the same age. So I'm happy that you were here so you could impart some of that knowledge on them, and I'm sure that in the engagement afterwards they'll be able to pick your brain further. But I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, having had the privilege of serving in the Coast Guard service and also the Barbados Coast Guard, to what extent do you believe that the Barbados Coast Guard was able to contribute not only to national security in the territorial waters of Barbados, but also to regional stability and security based on having that calming presence in this part of the region and being able to patrol our maritime waters in the Eastern Caribbean?
Thanks, Mr. for that question. Now, you can see me here, I'm from a different generation. And that generation really is quite different from this one, and you expect it. By my generation, we just want to serve. I would say to you that in the early days when we came over to the Barbados Regiment from the Coast Guard, we were paid every 2 weeks, and those like what to pay the civil servants. And guys were just through the locker. We lived in camp, just want to serve, and just being able to serve regardless of the conditions, because some of the conditions, as I look back now and see where I was as an officer at Wilbert Fort, where I slept, etc. I wouldn't expect this to happen now, but in those days we were very committed, and we took pride in being a member of the Coast Guard. And those things drove us. But then again, having said that, that was the Barbados that I grew up in. And it was one that you get a job or you get an opportunity to serve, whether you're a carpenter, mason, whatever qualification, you did it with the best of your ability and had pride in it. Even those people who work in the sanitation, they had pride. And everybody had pride, you know, I'm serving the country. happen across the world. And most of the countries that you see are successful. And there's a book, Rise and Fall of Nations, and you'll see that one generation tend to work hard and sacrifice and build. And then it makes it easier for the next generation. That generation comes along and they then don't work as hard, and things, you know, are automated, electronics, etc. And things get a little easier. And then the other generation comes and they think, well, you don't need to work, you know, we got it made. And then what happened? Fall again. I think the guys Kennedy or something like that, The Rise and Fall of the Nation. Very interesting book to me. You look at all the nations across the world. This is not really apply to Barbados directly, but just trying to use that example. And so to answer your question, we serve because we enjoyed doing it, and we were proud that we were able to have the opportunity to serve the nation. So that's what drove us along. Not taking any call, things from Coast Guard commanders.
You took us from Enterprise and you got us to Pelican, and you've been part of that journey throughout. And you gave us some detail, lots of context, etc. But could you tell us what you would like to see in your retirement when you look back as to what should happen in the next maybe 20 or 30 years?
That's a very challenging question, because I'm going to see things through my... And as I said earlier, we live in a different world today. And the world that we lived in back then, as I said, with bipolar, you had the communists on one side, or the socialists, and you had the other, the socialists on the other side. And you know, things were working. Now we're in a very complex world. We didn't have anything to do with like AI and all these other difficulties and drones and all sorts of things that are happening right now. As I said in my closing remarks, I will be remiss of me to say what the role of the Barbados Coast Guard should be in the next 5 years. I don't even know what will happen next year. But what I can say is that if you remain resolute, if you remain committed, then the task at hand can be overcome. We had a lot of challenges that we overcame. And again, as I mentioned, for example, we left with over 42 men at the old Coast Guard and moved to 16 men. And those 16 men had to do everything. Well, we got a few guys from the Barbados Regiment who joined eventually. But those 16 men had to continue doing all the things, and you can see the world didn't stop. So to answer your question, I think that what I'd like to see is that the Coast Guard continue to be resolute, committed to the task at hand. And there will be challenges. There will always be challenges. But to be able to rise above the challenges by working as a team and working together. Because I'm of the opinion that the role of the Coast Guard is a very serious one. Unlike other countries that have borders, we don't have any, we have borders like you can Guyana to Suriname, or from the French Guyana. But we are surrounded by the sea, and we have a lot of open areas, and it has always been our challenge. So I would like to see the Coast Guard remain committed and focused. And from what I've seen right now, a lot of training to make use of those opportunities and to do the best that they can. Remember that you're not serving yourself, you're serving God and you're serving the nation.
Good evening, Commander. Thank you very much for your thought-provoking presentation. As you said not too long ago, you're not going to take any questions from former Coast Guard commanders. So
that was just between the commanders.
I'm going to doff that hat and put on a different hat this evening.
He resigned. He's retired now. I mean, you're a servant. So.
My question to you: during the journey of the Barbados Coast Guard, there was a very heavy Royal Navy influence that stemmed across the Barbados Defence Force, but particularly the Barbados Coast Guard, where you had a wide range of skills that had to be developed, navigation, engineering, etc. And through that period, those individuals, you call them foreign service officers, or there's another name that I wouldn't use right now to describe the individuals then. But they would have helped develop the Barbados Coast Guard, built the customs traditions of the organization to where you would have left it, where he took over eventually. We're going through a period now of flux, where we are seeing a diminution of customs traditions of the Barbados Coast Guard. We are seeing a decline in some of these skill sets due to attrition, not for lack of training, but due to attrition, etc. What I can say in the next few years, the Barbados Coast Guard, which is going to be at the forefront of development for things I will not mention right now, we're going to go through a rapid expansion once again. Do you see a need for the Barbados Defense Force to reach out to those larger navies, larger coast guards, to seek its assistance in developing the Barbados Coast Guard of the future? Or do you think that we have enough capacity in the region in Barbados to rebuild a Coast Guard with those naval standards, traditions, and customs?
Thanks for that question. I didn't mention the loan service personnel who came from the United Kingdom around 1980, and they were here in Barbados for the Coast Guard for about 8 years. Their role at the time, not only in Barbados but throughout the region, was really to help develop the young personnel who needed training. And plus they had some artificers, guys who were trained, highly qualified electricians, engineers, etc. as well. One of the things that I always ask myself, why in Barbados only? You go to Trinidad and you see persons who were around working, they're back there and lending assistance, etc. You go to Jamaica, you see old colonels who in the 90s in the mess, etc. The point I'm making is that there's a lot of persons who serve in the Barbados Defense Force that can still, Coast Guard, can still make a contribution. I raise my hand, right? If I'm called and asked, so come to work, but I could come and do a class, I could come and assist with navigation, still navigation as was before, point A to point B, you have different equipment, etc. Commander Dowridge is there, and other persons who would have worked. I don't want to commit anybody else, but some names come through my head that if you had to say to them, well, come and give us we run a course or we're doing some training and you want some assistance, I'm certain we will come. But I benefit significantly from the Barbados Defense Force, significantly. The man I am today, in this old age, is a lot of it came because of the training, development, export of the Barbados Defense Force. I give back to the community in other areas, and I certainly, if the opportunity arises, I would give back to the Barbados Defense. I don't like the word giving back. I would like to continue to make a contribution to the Defense Force. So my point about that is the first thing I would suggest is that you start looking at those persons who serve and can still make a contribution, because the Defense Force, unlike most places, you have to leave fairly early. At 45 years and you're not, and you're a captain and you don't seem to make major, you got a 45-year-old person can have a contribution made. And a lot of people left and would still continue, would like to make a contribution. It'll be a full-time thing, but certainly the areas they can assist in training. And there's a lot of areas that, still need to be built up, and even areas to do with not necessarily operations, but areas to do with development of the officer as an individual, etc. So that is my first suggestion. As far as the Royal Navy and other navies is concerned, the Royal Navies right now are struggling to meet their quota as far as getting personnel. In fact, a couple of years ago, they were in the Caribbean. They didn't come to Barbados, nor Antigua, nor St. Kitts, because they all have Coast Guards. But they were in all the other islands offering excellent packages for young men and women to come and join the Royal Navy, and the Army as well, so the recruiting. So I don't know how much assistance you'll get from the Royal Navy at this time, although if you have some specialized training, certainly some arrangement can be made through your, or maybe through the British High Commission. But I think we have a pool of persons who were trained and benefit from the Defense Force that we should start looking at and calling on to help us to navigate the way ahead. All right, there's one at the back there.
Good night, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation. You cite some things that I myself did not know, and I thought I knew a lot about Coast Guard history. So I want to say thank you for that. I also want to ask you, because you spoke a lot about selfless service and generational gaps, but what I wanted to ask you is, were there persons you would say that were influential to you as a young officer? And I can wait for that answer, and then I can ask the next questions.
I didn't get that.
Or were there any persons you would say that were influential to you when you were a young officer?
Yes. Yes, there were. Influence for me. Did I get the question correctly? If there were any persons that influenced me when I was a young officer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, there's several persons. From my background, I need to say a little bit, but I come from a very humble background. And life teaches you, you can watch people and learn about life. There are some persons, I don't know if they want me to call their name right now, but there are some persons in the Barbados Defense Force who had an impact on my life. It was Colonel Maynard. Colonel Maynard was one who was very encouraging, and his style of doing things really impacted me. Even the brigadier was surprised to hear he say this, but the brigadier had a very rigid thing, call you and cuss you and then tell you come have a drink in the mess because you do something wrong. But he was a stickler for details, and that stuck with me. If you can do something, do it right the first time. It may take a little longer, but do it right the first time. And then you won't have to revisit it. And then when you do that, you set an example for the persons behind you. They know you are someone who's a stickler for detail, but not a stickler for detail with angus or being angry and getting upset when somebody gets it wrong the first time, but practicing that yourself and then pass on to others. There are a number of other persons who were Colonel Gittins. Most of the officers were at the time were much older than I am, and they had significant influence. There were also officers from the reserves at the time who would come in the early days. They didn't have officers do duty officers. They would come in from work in the Barbados Regiment and do duty. So yes, there are a lot of people that influenced me in the force and even outside the force.
So thank you, sir.
Okay.
Right, so you basically answered the question how I thought you would. So my second lead-up question to that is, for persons who are currently serving, obviously, especially persons I would say like mid to senior level, who would have obviously have to be benefiting from other persons as well. I just wanted to know if you can say something to the persons and let them know that at a certain level, you are responsible for mentoring, guiding, etc. Because persons would have gotten you to the position that you are at now. And you are now in the position to do the same. And I heard you spoke about not being anxious and cussing and, getting all like that, but more as in guiding. So what would you say really would be guiding words to persons in these positions now, such as myself, so as to guide persons now, sir?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would start by saying that we all are given free choice by God to do whatever you want, right? To live your life according to how you want to live. The military, for me, when I got involved in the military, I didn't want to be a soldier. You wouldn't believe that. I didn't want nothing to do with military. I actually started out, and I wanted to be a merchant navy captain. I went to Jamaica, even when I joined the Defense Force, and did the home trade mate and home trade exams, and then I was supposed to go back to sea for a year and then go and sit my exams. In fact, the paper I did, just showing a little bit, was the captain exam, but the guy couldn't find the mate exam. So I had already passed the exam, I just had to put in some sea time. But I would say this openly, God had a plan for me which I didn't quite understand at the time. And I look back now and see a lot of my friends who went off and were merchant navy captains in those days. I'm talking about run a ship from New York all the way down to the Caribbean, container ship, etc. That's what I wanted. I wanted that freedom, etc. And what God was allowed to happen for me is that I was still able to go to sea, have an enjoyable career at sea. I bought trading over from UK, no satellite navigation at the time, the old sextants and radar beacons, and we arrived here safely on time. And the point I'm making is that you cannot, I can speak here till tomorrow morning telling someone how to behave and what to do, etc. If that person don't have it in them or want to do it, it's not going to happen. It starts with you. It starts with the individual. And as I said, I didn't want to be a soldier, I didn't want to be an officer, but after I became an officer, I recognized there were certain responsibilities I had because people were looking for me for advice, military advice. But then as time went on, I realized that some of these persons I worked with, they had enough confidence in me to share personal matters which had nothing to do with the military. But then I realized if I show them away, then I would have a soldier or a person working for me who would be on the job, but his thoughts is that about something happened at home, whether it be his child not well or whatever, some incident, which does not relate to defense force. It does relate because I want a person on duty that if he's working on an engine, he would not drop a spanner engine or work on a radar, that he wouldn't drop something in the radar to damage something for $90,000 or so. So I took the position that leadership for me then would be one of not only advising and setting examples. I didn't get it right all the time, so don't get me wrong. I got it wrong sometimes. But I made an effort to make sure that how I behave as an officer and what I did as an officer would be able to impact those who work around me and to find time for them when they have their problems. And once you do that, you can shut your eyes. First, look out for you 24/7. Even today, I come in the Defense Force and not boasting anyway, but I just tell my experience. I share my experience with you. And people come in, sorry, me, and he said, well, sir, so-and-so, you know. And this would happen to anybody. But we live in a busier world now. Everybody is sort of everything quickly and sometimes very challenging. But your point that the question you asked is not something that I can stand here and say to people what to do. Everybody as an officer, every officer in here would know, and even senior NCOs would went to leadership training and taught how to lead men and how to set examples, etc. But at the end of the day, it rests with the individual. Right? But I can tell you what worked for me and how I try to navigate those challenges which affected me.
Yes, good evening, sir. I want to join with the others in expressing appreciation for an excellent presentation. I had intended to ask a question about personnel, but I think the previous question guided you in that direction. I have been associated with the Barbados Defense Force since 1988. And the truth is, during that period, I've met some wonderful people. Most of my time has been spent at the Coast Guard. But I remember when I first went to the Coast Guard, what stood out to my mind was the quality of people we had. I may just say the fellas move around the base, how they carry themselves. And I make mention of this all the time. I was teaching the recruits the class just a few weeks ago, and I told them the same thing. Commander Dowridge, yourself, several other guys. In fact, many of the guys then went on to leadership positions. There's something about the Coast Guard, and the emphasis is on the Coast Guard tonight. But what is it? What is it that inspired that excellent motif? I remember very clearly, and again I made a reference to it. We were years ago, we were at the Old Fort in devotions, Amanda. Those times you stood up in the yard. There was an accident on the careenage. And before I could look around good, so those fellas had the little boats, you know, all loose from the mooring, and were on the other side rescuing the fellas. And I said, what precision? What precision and class and expertise? And certainly that was a reflection of the training and the experience. So I've had some very, very, very good experiences. And as you know, like in any other thing, you remember people and how they impact you. In fact, I'm now pre-retirement from teaching at Harrison College. I had 26 wonderful years there. But I tell people the best reference that I got, sir. The best reference I got came from you. You wrote my testimonial.
Yeah, do this all the time.
And I think you should mention that. You wrote my testimonial. One of the best testimonials I've ever had. So I just thought in this setting that I would mention that. I mean, I've had some unique experiences as well. I remember once being called out. Coast Guard, it was late at night too, because there was some problem on a visiting ship. I know the fellas drank too much, so they were in Nelson Street or whatever. But somebody died. And I remember late night I was called out. You know, you had to be taken out in a small boat, you know, take up into the ship. And it was not easy, because there were different emotions. Fellas were vexed, some were sad. And you had to spend hours in that ship counseling those sailors. And that's only one of the many, many experiences. Thank you, sir, for reminding us of the journey. Thank you.
I don't know why Dr. is my good friend. Always take the opportunity to talk about that testimony, which was done many, many years ago. But just to make a quick point, Coast Guard, seamen in a whole, have a different approach to life, and this is no disrespect to the infantry, to working on land. See on a 60-footer or 100-footer, something happens, there's no fireman to call, they don't run down the road and get matches or what the case may be. You've got to do everything there. And if you're 200 miles out and you can swim to get to the good. So you always develop, you always in Coast Guard training, particularly in fact in the British Navy, and they do what they call a shakedown. They put you on board a vessel and they go through exercise after exercise, exercise after exercise, till you come like a team, like a cricket team or a football team. Before somebody blink an eye, you know it's that happen. The other thing, the captain on the bridge, or the command officer, he is the senior among equals, first among equals. The junior person working down the bilge in the engine room, he is just in part of that ship. Because if he don't do his watch correctly when he's on watch, and water start to come in the vessel, the ranks that the captain got on his shoulder don't make a difference. Everybody can sink. So you treat that man as an important part of the team. Right? The infantry may have got a different approach, or he's a private soldier, you know, etc. But on board the ship, everybody is like this. Everybody's a team. Everybody respect. If your job is painting or cooking or whatever it is, people respect you because you're part of the team. Right? Because when you're far away from shore, life is quite different. And when the sea get rough, life is even more different. And then when you got to engage the enemy, life even get more difficult. You still got to continue to do everything you're supposed to do, regardless of the conditions. And therefore, that team effort is very, very critical. Right? You cannot go without that. Can't go without that.
Good evening, sir. First of all, I'm Recruit O'Neill A, and I would like to thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, and I learned a lot about the Coast Guard. I am currently a Coast Guard Reserve recruit, and I wanted to know what advice you have for young seamen who are willing to go far and excel in their careers. Well, Ms. Carvalho asked it at the senior level. I want to ask it at the junior level now. What advice do you have?
You know, it's very difficult to ask people what ideas they have. My thing to any young person, work hard, give it your best shot, right? Treat everybody equal, respect others, you know, and try to build a team around you, work as a team. Life is so challenging that there's my experience that I share, right? Good communication. But the military or anywhere else in the world. In my opinion, we went to headquarters in the Defense Force headquarters. Reserves were able to help the a little breather. That makes life a lot easier. So reserves should be encouraged, and I think it's one of the areas that we should look at more and try to develop that area. Well, if no further questions, I want to sincerely thank you for this opportunity. I want to say again that I feel very indebted to the Barbados Defense Force, the Barbados Coast Guard, and the Barbados Defense Force in general for all that I was able to achieve in life and all the experiences I had. I had a very enjoyable time. As I said in my opening remarks, it was not easy sailing. But when I look back now, looking back over the stern, for the master ceremony would want me to say this, looking back over the stern, I look back with great gratitude and very thankful for the persons I came in contact with. I know for sure that I've impacted some lives, and I have lived a life that I don't use the word proud, but I'm very grateful for, because things that I was able to do in the Defense Force, and as I said earlier, some of my friends who went off and did the exciting things that I want to do as a young person, I look at them now, and their experience was very limited to a particular area, and my experience was very wide and wide-ranging. I had a chance to influence young men and young women, and also to achieve quite a bit, traveling around the world, etc. So I want to say thanks once again, and it was a pleasure coming here at this age to make this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Kirton, for that fantastic presentation and insight on the Barbados Coast Guard and its contributions over the years. At this time, we will like to invite you, sir, before we get into our prize for the evening, we'd like to invite you to come on up, sir, and also the Commanding Officer for the Barbados Coast Guard for the presentation. At this time, I'd like to invite Lieutenant Maynard, who will ask the question for the grand prize for this evening. I think it might be a airline ticket for two or something. I'm not sure, maybe, but I hand it over to him at this time.
It might be a bus ticket back to your respective bases. Chief of Staff, Brigadier Corliss Lovell, Captain Naval, Deputy Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force, Captain Naval Mark Peterson, Commanding Officer of the Barbados Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer of the Barbados Coast Guard Acting, Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, our guest speaker, Commander Wilbert Kirton. Thank you for an excellent presentation. It really reside with me, having known anything about the Coast Guard. Officers, senior enlisted, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm under immense pressure because this question is about the Coast Guard, and I don't know if the answer is correct, but I will go with whatever the answer is. As an infantry officer, I know very little about the Coast Guard. So the question for the prize: when was Pelican Base commissioned, and which OPV was commissioned first? I will tell you what the prize is first. Sit down, sit down, sit down. I will tell you what the prize is first, and then you can stand. So the prize compliments Blue Horizon Hotels. Is a weekend staycation for two. And on the count of three, the first person to stand will get to ask the question. One, two, three. You get up first. Come.
Good evening again. 2007 Leonard C. Banfield. Oh!
We want the date.
Tough enough, someone gonna give me half the ticket, please.
She answered both. Who else want to take a try at the room? Somebody's coming already. And he's an infantryman.
The 14th of September.
14th of September, what year?
2007.
What was the other part of the question? What was the answer for the other part of the question?
What was the other question?
Which boat was commissioned first? Thank you very much. The answer just gave already.
Thank you, Lieutenant Maynard. At this time, as we move gently along, I'd now like to invite Sub-Lieutenant Chad Callis for the vote of thanks.
Chief of Staff, Brigadier Carlos Lovell, Deputy Chief of Staff, Captain Naval Mark Peterson, former Deputy Chief of Staff and today's guest lecturer, Commander Wilbert Kirton, Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps, Commander David Dorridge, Commanding Officer, Barbados Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer, Barbados Coast Guard Acting, Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, Chaplain of the Barbados Coast Guard, the Reverend Dr. Joel Cumberbatch, First Sergeant Major, Master Chief Petty Officer 1, Austin Howell, officers both serving and retired, warrant officers, enlisted ranks both serving and retired, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. Good night. I am Lieutenant Chad Callis, and it is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks. The Almighty has given us the mental and physical fortitude to get through the trials of this year, so that we can experience sessions like tonight. For this, His thanks must come first. I would like to extend the warmest appreciation to our distinguished lecturer, Commander Wilbert Kirton, for the insightful presentation about the Barbados Coast Guard. Your comprehensive overview of the operations, responsibilities, and the impact has significantly enriched our understanding of this vital service. It was a pleasure, sir, to have you walk us through the transition from a simple Coast Guard service to a developed, capable, and experienced Barbados Coast Guard unit. We are grateful for your clarity and depth. We are grateful for the clarity and depth you brought to this topic, and that is testament to the years of experience you had within the maritime security sector. I would also like to recognize the contributions of the 45th Anniversary Committee for another seamlessly executed event. Your meticulous planning and organizational skills have allowed us to learn and be inspired. Also, the logistical staff that assisted the committee tonight, your hard work behind the scenes does not go unnoticed, and we are truly thankful for your efforts. We extend our gratitude to the HQ BDF staff for their vision in initiating this event. It is through your commitment to raising awareness and fostering discussions on important topics like the role of the Barbados Coast Guard, inspire and educate the force. We sometimes sit in our unit and subunit silos and we do not get the opportunity to fully appreciate the impact that various parts of this Army give to the local and regional population. Opportunities like these broaden and deepen our knowledge about the force, and we thank you for believing in the importance of this dialogue. We are also thankful for the presence of the BDF civilian staff and the honored guests who took the time to join us today. Your participation is appreciated. Special thanks to the UWI Cavell campus for allowing us to use this facility to broaden and deepen our knowledge. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the media representatives present here. Your role in documenting and sharing tonight's event is crucial to spreading awareness about the valuable work of the Barbados Coast Guard, the importance of maritime security and safety and security, and the sacrifices that are made by the sailors for this great nation. Thank you for your support in amplifying our message. For those persons or organizations not mentioned, thank you for assisting in making tonight a success. To everyone present, thank you for attending, and I wish you a good night.
you, Sub-Lieutenant Callis. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings to an end the official aspect of this evening. I trust that you would have soaked up all that was said here tonight, and I'm quite sure that we are all appreciative. We will now retire to enjoy some light refreshments and further engage during our mix and mingle. I am Lieutenant Coast Guard Crispin Hackett, and it has been a pleasure to be your master of ceremonies, and as we would say, fair winds and following seas. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a good evening. And please stand as we let the guests exit first.